One of the things that I have to do regularly for my role, as well as for my own personal pleasure, is to travel. Does anybody like travelling here in the congregation? There's a few of you. Does anybody hate it? My sister-in-law, my brother's wife, hates travel. She detests it. She'll do it if she has to. She loves when she gets there and enjoys the thing, but actually the packing, the going on the whatever, whether it's a car or a plane or whatever, she doesn't like it at all. So quite often she chooses not to travel for that reason. And one of the reasons is the issue of packing. Trying to pack everything that you need or you think you might need can for some people be a challenge. Now Steph's not here, so I'm going to tell a story about her. When I pack, I can actually fit all my stuff into a carry-on bag and fit it above the thing. And I can probably do that for 2 weeks. Steph goes away for 2 days and needs a suitcase this size and that big in order to get all the things that she thinks she needs in order to go. Is anybody like that here? There's a couple of you like that. Is there anybody who can just deal with carry-on luggage? Yep, I figured Aaron might be one of them. So the question is, when you go on a journey, what do you really, really need to pack? Jesus, that's the answer. God bless you all. Enjoy morning tea. Yes, Jesus. But why is it that we, as disciples of Jesus, feel like we need to pack a whole bunch more stuff in before we go out on mission? It's a question that I want to ask you as we consider this text, because this text actually talks about Jesus sending 72 disciples out onto mission. And he gives some pretty clear instructions on how you go about doing that. We are disciples of Jesus. He gives the same instructions to us. So as we consider what this text says, think about what does it look like for you to do mission and what you take out there. But before we get on to that, there's an aspect that I've been challenged with when I prep for this text. And I've often heard this text about the work is great, the harvest is great, but the workers are few, in an attempt to try and get people to do stuff. That's essentially where this message often goes. Get off your backside and get out into the harvest. As I was preparing for this text, I actually came another revelation. And even the label that was given in the Bible reading kind of indicates that idea. I think the point of the text actually is not the fact that the workers are few. The point of the text is that the harvest is great. There are people and situations that need the love of God. That's what Jesus is saying. And he says to pray to the Lord of the harvest to send workers. And the people that he's talking about are the people who are going out into the mission field. So he's actually asking, I think this is my revelation, he's actually asking for the people of God who are already out there ready to harvest to actually go and do the harvest. And this idea of urgency, the actual harvest is so great. Now, I'm not a farmer. I can sort of grow things, but it's probably not. But I've been told that if you're a harvester, if you're a farmer, you've got to get the harvest off the trees or off the things really quickly. Otherwise, it just dies. So you've got a very short period of time to harvest on. And this is the idea that Jesus is talking about in this text, is that the harvest is ready and needs to be done straight away. So there's this sense of urgency. And sometimes in the church, we want to do the next thing, get the more resources, get a bigger team, have better training, have a better understanding before we actually deal with the harvest, which is great. Now, we should go out prepared. I'm not saying that we shouldn't prepare, but sometimes we use those things as an excuse not to go and do the harvest that is great and is ready to be picked. We often focus on our lack of the things that we don't have, rather than the abundance and the urgency of the harvest. And I think Jesus challenges his disciples, the 72 in this case, don't worry about what you don't have. The harvest, if you go out there, will look after itself. And part of this challenge, I think, is that God has already provided the harvest for us. And I often talk about, and others have spoken about from this platform, that the purpose of mission is not to go and do God's work for him, but rather to go and see where God is already working and join him in the harvest. That's what the role of a disciple is. So if we think we've got to do God's work for him, then we probably should get all our resources so we can actually be like God. But that's not what God calls us to do. He calls us to go and join him in that work. The church has never had enough resources to do the mission that it's called to do. Never in its history has it had enough resources. But we're still called to go out and do God's mission in any case. And in fact, I think you'll find church history says that the resources that we need to continue the mission are actually found in the harvest. So quite often we don't get the resources we need to do what we need to do until we actually take the step of faith and start doing the work that God calls us to do. If you know anything about church history, you'll know that after the Gospel era and before, when the Roman Empire was in its full flight, Christianity wasn't yet a recognised religion. It grew its fastest in that time. And it's not because it had great resources, because they didn't. It wasn't because they had great favour, because they didn't. They were illegal. It wasn't because they had an easy life. They didn't. They were persecuted. It was because, as you can see in the text that was read out to us earlier, they showed hospitality and just went to the harvest that they saw in front of them. For them, it wasn't about having the right resources or the right training or the right whatever. It was actually just to go about doing and engaging in the spaces where God had placed them. Hospitality that you would have seen in the story about how to actually go and do mission was an incredibly important part of that early part of the church. They just loved people. They healed them, they brought them in, they engaged with them. It didn't matter what part of life they were in. That's what they did. And in fact, one of the emperors, Julian the Apostate, it's a great name, isn't it? Was writing to one of his advisors and was absolutely concerned about what he called the Galileans. He couldn't stop them. And he said because they invite everybody into their love feasts without exclusion. And that's why the church grew. The empire could not actually stop the church growing because of their hospitality. So this morning, one thing I want you to go away with is that you don't need a Bachelor of Mission. You don't need great resources. You don't need a lot of things to do mission. You just need a heart of hospitality, which is to engage with somebody that you see, listen, hear them, love them, and treat them right as God would want us to do. And that's actually just mission. That's all that we're called to do there. So, have a think about who is in your life, the people that you interact with, and just ask the question, how could I show God's hospitality in this situation? It's not complex, and then go and do it. That's the first thing. The second thing that we see in this text is that Jesus actually says that you might not actually always be received well in the places that you go. And or the things might be difficult. And so he encourages us to persevere. And this is where the peacemaking comes in again. That we're there to be people of peace. If we don't get the response that we need, we just move on. We go to the next thing. We don't try and bang on in the same space the whole time. We're not supermen or superwomen. We're not God. We have to do in this space in terms of just providing that peace. We are partners in mission with God. We've got to recognise our part in the mission and do it. And there's two parts to it, as there always is. Jesus says to heal the sick and tell them that the kingdom of God is with you. So it's both social transformation and spiritual transformation through peace rather than through force. And if that peace doesn't land either of those things, we move on. When that happens, Jesus says, and this is an interesting little quirk in the text I find here, is that he equates when his disciples do that really well, that he sees Satan falling from heaven like lightning. And then he goes on to tell the disciples that he's given them the authority. And that got me thinking, what does that actually mean? How does people offering peace in a situation push Satan off his throne? And one of the challenges that I have in this with the idea of Satan is actually going back to the actual meaning of the word Satan. And the word Satan means an accuser. And it got me to thinking, when we are people of peace, the Satan can no longer accuse us. And therefore he loses his power. The only power Satan has over us is when we believe the accusations that he casts at us. When we start to believe the lies, that's why he's called the father of lies, and appropriate them for ourselves, we become stuck and constrained and believe that we actually can't do the thing that God has called us to do. However, when we are people of peace and rely on God's peace, that enables us to ignore, maybe not ignore is not the right word, but at least push back those lies, those stories that Satan tries to tell us, that we're not good enough, that we don't have enough, that it's all too hard, that we should just give up and stop. And so I think one of the reasons, this is where the whole text comes back to the circle again, why Jesus says, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send the workers, is because sometimes we, and I include myself in this, get stuck. We feel like that we actually can't do the work that God has called us to do. And in some ways it's true, we can't do it. God can, and we're called to partner with him to do it. But when we think we have to do it, we do get stuck. And so as we think about what that means for us in our work here at Merri-bek City Salvos, in your own lives, in the worlds and people that you come in to engage with, and you think about what mission, God's mission might look like in all of those contexts, we sometimes can get stuck and frozen and can't think, I don't know how I can fix this. The text this morning provides us with an encouragement that it's actually really very easy. We show peace and we show hospitality to the people that God sends us. It's not any more complex than that. Any other resources and training are a bonus, but peace and hospitality. And when we do that, Satan falls from heaven and the kingdom of God is advanced. And that's a really, really good thing. The challenge that Jesus then throws into at the end, it's a little bit of a kicker at the end. He says, don't get excited about your success in that way. Just thank God that you are found in his book of life, that you have a relationship with him. That's where a true source of joy and encouragement should come from. Because sometimes seeing results in mission is really, really difficult. And as someone who is part of the leadership of the Salvation Army, the church is going through a pretty challenging time at the moment in terms of what was considered to be success. And sometimes if we focus on the success and think about that's where our joy or good stuff comes from, again, we can be belied and fooled by Satan, that we're not actually having the effect that God calls us to. Our joy and our meaning and our validation is not found in the results that we get, but it is found in the relationship that we have with God. It's a story I have to keep telling myself, and I'm sure it's a story our church here, but also as individuals, we need to keep retelling ourselves. Our validation is not found in what we do, but it's found in our relationship with God. So this text, it was a good reminder for me, and I think for us as a church, as we try and navigate into what the next bit of the future looks like. It's simple. Be people of peace, be people of hospitality, and rely on our relationship with God as a validation for who we are and our faith.